this tends to be a time of year when we think about change, but we don't couch it as change. How do we couch it? We don't think of it as change, but that's what it is.
New Year's resolution.
New Year's resolution. And we make resolutions because there's something we want to change. And then we're notorious for being real good at it for a month.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about change this month because of that background, but I'm not going to talk about New Year's resolutions. I'm not going to talk about. I want to actually explore change. It's a huge topic in Buddhism, even though it's not necessarily emphasized. It's couched on as subtopics of other topics, which is fine. However it's couched is how it's couched. But it is a big topic in Buddhism. So my first question is, what is our response to the idea of change? If you just think of change, there's like change happening. Change happens.
At times a little bit of fear.
Mm-hmm. A little bit of fear. Anybody else?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, like I don't like that, I don't want that, you know. Things are changing, then that means I don't have control.
Okay, so lack of control, because things are changing and I don't know what's coming and I don't know what it's going to look like. That can be one of the reasons for fear. Why else?
Adjustment.
Adjustment. So if things change, that implies that I have to change, or my life is going to change, or something is going to change, and I don't know how to change, or what's going to change, or how to deal with the change. So some adjustment, some work that I'm maybe not feeling skillful enough to accomplish with the outcome that I would hope for. Anybody else?
Uncertainty and mystery.
Uncertainty and mystery, which can be either intriguing or frightening. One of the two. We may feel. Did you have something you wanted to say, Palmo?
Not knowing what to change.
Not knowing what to change. What needs to be. If I'm going to change, what needs to change? And I think there's also the changes are coming down the pike. There's this flow of change, and we may feel like we're at its mercy. I mean, let's face it, we're getting ready, starting this evening, to face 2 or 3 days of forecasted wind chill temperatures colder than any of us have ever experienced, unless we lived in the winter in North Dakota or
the Arctic.
at the Arctic or Antarctic, okay? I mean, I have a former student who used to live in Dakota, grew up in Dakota, and said we had temperatures this cold sometimes. And I'm telling you, this is what you need to do, you know, and hunker down. So, you know, I'm getting ready to hunker down for 2 days.
I
But
don't think that change necessarily means fear. There's a challenge and an exhilarating feelings that you can get from trying to change.
Right.
It doesn't have to be
it doesn't have to
fearful.
be fearful. But unless we look at our fear and why we're fearful, we have we have this understanding from the teachings of Lord Buddha Shakyamuni about attachment and aversion. It's this push me, pull you energy, where we try to pull to us what we want and push away what we don't want. So we can look at change as either pulling what we want or pushing what we don't want, and the push and pull is based on our basic ignorance, which we can look in terms of change. We don't know what the changes are going to be. So we kind of have this, are we going to try to push it away? Or if it's something we want, are we going to pull it towards us? And actually the Buddhist teachings recommend that we approach everything with a state of equanimity. But I'm not even going to talk about equanimity regarding change. I'm just acknowledging we could take that approach to this topic. I'm not going to, but that is another way that we could go. So we have these options where the pulling toward and the pushing away are still both based on ignorance and will not bring the desired result. So what we're going to talk about is what is the desired result, so that hopefully we can avoid the whole push me, pull you dynamic. So I want to, in fact, before I even go to reading a comment from our teacher on change, I want to bring in the fact that the Buddha's first teachings to his, after enlightenment, he went back to his former friends who he was meditator with. He was sort of like the most skillful meditator. They looked at him as a leader. And he decided that the particular way they were approaching it wasn't going to get him the result he wanted. It wasn't going to answer his questions. So he went off on his own for a while and did a different process and meditated and achieved enlightenment. Afterwards, he walked back to where they had been before, which was, I don't know, it took us, maybe 18, 20 hours on really bumpy, poor Indian roads to drive the distance between the two locations. So it must have taken him a fair amount of time walking to get back there. And he began to teach what he had learned. And the very first thing he taught is the basic of the Buddhist path, and it's called the Four Noble Truths. And the first noble truth is that suffering exists. Life is suffering. And when the Buddha is giving examples of what is suffering about life, change is one of those major things. Change happens, and we seem to have no control over it. Now, the second noble truth is that suffering has causes, and the third one is suffering can end, and the fourth noble truth is there's a way to do it. So it's not all about suffering, it's all about how to end suffering. The Four Noble Truths. But the idea of we tend to experience change as suffering, and change is one of the sufferings of the human realm. There's certain changes that we can't avoid. We can't avoid getting sick at some point. We can avoid a lot of sickness, but most people are going to get sick at least once before they die. I mean, the human body is not everlasting. The change that people will die or leave our lives. Everything from our dear pets who have a much shorter lifespan than we do, to our friends. And even you graduated from high school, you may have thought, these friends I've had, especially in my senior year, they're just my best friends and we'll be in touch always. Do we remember their names? They were so important. So, the loss as things change, there are these potential losses. And then someday we will die. Someday we will die. So these are examples of change that tend to be part of the suffering of human life. So I want to read, our teacher has written 2 books. She's working on a couple more. And this is a wonderful book, Red Lotus Buddhist Wisdom, where we had asked her to take some of her really, I'm going to call it Dharma sound bites, because they're some short distilled bits of wisdom, and actually put them into a book. And so she put them into this book. I'm looking for page 18. And then pictures mostly of lotuses on the other page. So this is the kind of book you can put on your coffee table and give as a gift and distill wisdom. She said, change is not the enemy. Change is how you are alive. How is it that change is how we're alive? Those 6 words are like amazing in their implication if you think about change is how we're alive. Just off the top of your head, what ways is change how we're alive?
Evolution.
Pardon?
Evolution.
Evolution. What else?
Learning.
Learning. Learning. Okay, nurse.
I was just thinking, like on a really basic level, even breathing is change.
Even breathing has
So-
changed.
So if there was no change, you just couldn't be alive.
Right. You know, in your body, in any given instant, there are a myriad of physiologic processes going on. The fact that it's a process means it's change. And if it were not occurring, we'd be dead. We'd be dead. So just on the moment-to-moment level, change is how we're alive. And then if we think about learning and so many other things, change is how we're alive. Now, like many others, I was originally taught in school, especially at the undergraduate level, and that most of the changes occur by the time while you're, infant to early adulthood. And by a certain point, most of your changes have occurred, your personality is set, da-da-da-da-da. Then when I was a master's student, I was introduced to philosophies of psychology called lifespan development. That said, actually change occurs across the entire lifespan, and you can change up until the moment you pass. And in fact, a quality adult life involves change. And the most quality adult lives are those who take a proactive response to change. Although if you're resistant, life will come along and knock you off your perch. So that most adults actually change and transform in response to traumatic events in their life, but that does not have to be what causes you to change. And so give up this whole idea of once you're an adult, you're pretty much set. And that is the psychological theory I did the rest of my graduate work based on. I even expounded as the basis of my doctoral dissertation that my approach to these topics is based on the lifespan development theory that came out of psychology, and these are the big theorists and these are their main proponents. So, flaming bias here, from an academic point of view, I am and have been for decades a lifespan developmentalist. And when I came to Buddhism, it's so congruent. It's so congruent because the whole idea of Buddhism is to change our minds so that our minds are transformed into something that will be a happy experience. And you've been studying Buddhism for years, you can say, yeah, that kind of distills it down. That sort of distills it down.
What I thought about is change promotes, when you would just use the word, promotes experience. It opens up doors for us to experience different things.
That we would not have otherwise.
Yes.
Or we can, in fact, take control of the
I think
change.
it's the other way around. Experience promotes change.
I think it's a feedback loop.
I agree.
And it's the difference between those who are adults who don't want to change, who are waiting for life because it will knock them off their perch, then the experience promotes the change. Or the adults who say, I'm going for it. All right? So it is a feedback loop. Then another quote from page 74 of this book. And I'll show you the picture just because it's so lovely. This is one we've heard a couple gazillion times. Holding away change and demanding life to be like it was before rubs and irritates the actual way you're alive, like petting a cat from tail to head. Want to hear that one again?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Hold. Let me get some warm water. It's great for the throat. Holding away change and demanding life to be like it was before rubs and irritates the actual way you are alive, like petting a cat from tail to head.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, there are a number of these books available in the back if you would like to acquire one and read some of the wonderful Dharma sound bites from our teacher. So one of the reasons that we will look at change in the new year without necessarily looking at it in quite the fearful way that we tend to. I saw this wonderful graphic on Facebook, and I had to download it because this is why we're actually more willing to look at change in the new year. Hope smiles from the threshold of the year to come, whispering, "It will be happier." And so what you'll hear in a lot of Buddhist teachings, and almost all Tibetan Buddhist Lamas, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama says it all the time, is that all living beings desire to avoid suffering and desire to have happiness. So in the new year, anything that promises it will be happier, that's what draws us to this mindset of New Year's resolutions. We're picking something that we want, that we feel is going to create happiness. And then we decide, I'm going to be doing this. And why do we lose our motivation about a month into it?
Well, sometimes it's not so comfortable.
Okay. So in order to get from here to there may be some uncomfortable bits before we get to the happiness. And so if we're really looking at being happier in the moment, when the going gets tough, we're like, oh, maybe I don't want it to do it today. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not.
Habits overpower the desire to change.
Habits overpower the desire to change. That's a big one. Yeah. It takes mindful awareness to overcome the habits until they are no longer habitual. It really does. Something that Rinpoche just posted on Facebook, and she's talking about optimism. But optimism is related to hope. Optimism is more of a generalized expectation that things will turn out well. And hope is more of a specific expectation that things will turn out well in a particular slice of our experience. So if I'm an optimist, I'm the kind of person who believes that life is generally going to be good and things are going to turn out okay. But if I hope for something, I have a very specific goal in mind. For example, if I was younger, and not, but if I was younger and I wasn't, I might hope to have children or hope to have a healthy child. Even if I wasn't a nun now at my age, if I hoped to have children, I'd be insane. Okay, so I do not hope to have children, and that's not an unhealthy thing. All right, so not hoping for something is not necessarily bad, because hope is specific toward the goal. So hope is more within the context of the situation and the goal you want, whereas optimism is a much more broad. There's no specific goal, it's an overall tendency to expect things to go well. So the quote I read on Facebook talks about hope. Remember, Shay's phrasing it as optimism. And she's like, what is it that makes optimists? Is it just an expectation that things go well, or is there something about optimism that actually helps you make things go better? Is it as a state of mind? And she says optimism has at its core optimizing. From the spectrum of choices of words, thoughts, and attitudes with which we face life, and I'm going to put that part in. An optimist will make the most of a situation by selecting only those marked positive, lifting those attitudes to the light of expression. So, we make a mental choice, and then we lift it from our mental into how we express ourselves in our words and our deeds. The optimist encourages poor choices to languish by disuse.
Ooh, say that again.
By lifting the positive attitudes to the light of expression, the optimist encourages poor choices to languish by disuse. So this is basically overcoming some of the habits that are not so helpful by not using them. If you don't use them, they languish and they no longer become habits. Make sense? Let's try to extract the essence of auspiciousness or even enhanced luck by the distillation of our choices. So what she's saying is optimists make better use of choices. Optimists probably see a broader range of choices than a pessimist does. Pessimists tend to see things in terms of black and white and don't see a range of choices. Optimists tend to see a range of choices. And we can actually do this by when we're feeling distressed. And if we recognize, I'm seeing things as pretty black and white, slowing down, sitting, and saying, what are other choices? And if we really can't see them, we have friends we can talk to. Can you see other choices I have? And actually listening to what they say. Have you ever talked to somebody and, they wanted your advice, you gave them advice, oh, that won't work, that won't work, that won't work, that won't. They weren't even listening. It's like they didn't really want a solution. They just wanted you to tell them that there is no solution, which was what they had determined already, right? So how many times are we that way? And if we ask for advice, if we go to the Buddhist teachings for advice, to actually be open to hearing what's said and to expand our range of solutions. So when we realize, if we finally realize we cannot hold away change, it's finally hit us that things are going to change, we can't hold it away. What are our choices at that point?
Well, compliance.
Compliance. So whatever change comes around, it just,
Well, you would probably choose the one that fit your situation.
Okay. What else? I think some people might take the go with the flow attitude. It's coming, I'm just going to surf it. I'm going to go with the flow. The only problem with going in the flow is not only do you not have any control, but you don't have to make any effort. And not making effort isn't going to help you transform into the kind of skillful being who is happy. So, go with the flow is probably a better choice than resisting everything. But it's not the final answer. I would say that. It's transitional. You need to work from being really, really resistant, maybe a little bit of go with the flow, and then I would propose that we look at a proactive approach. Change is going to happen. Oh, good. If I don't change, I can't become enlightened because there's obstacles between me and enlightenment, and somehow I have to get rid of them. At the same time, there are skills and ways of looking at things and doing things I need to develop in order to be an enlightened being, being a contributing member of enlightened society. Which is, one of the reasons that Joyful Path offers the Loving Kindness series. It's so transformative, and it's so actually easy. Once we start looking at it, it's not that hard. It's easy and it's basic, and you don't have to be a Buddhist to do it. You can be in anything and do it. One of the students who will come, not always, but occasionally, to Baraboo when I teach there once a month. And in 2013, we spent the entire year looking at loving kindness. The first year and a half we were doing other things. This year we looked at loving kindness. We're about ready to move on. But she's a scientist who became somewhat ill and couldn't do all the scientific things she typically did, so she started looking at happiness and positive things in more of a spiritual approach. And one of the things she said, because she was raised in one of the Christian traditions, which, she still appreciates. I appreciate what I learned when I was raised as a Christian, very much so. She says the many other religions will tell you what to do, that you need to be kind, that you need to be all these other things. What they don't do is tell you how. Okay, and in the Loving Kindness series, in the Loving Kindness teachings, it's very simple to learn how. And there's nothing like a good recipe book to make nothing like a good recipe book, The proactive approach. So, the world will tell you, set your goals and then make a plan to reach the goal. I want to become a millionaire, I need to do da-da-da-da-da, or whatever. And that can work, and it does for many people. But I look at it as tending to be more samsaric. It's more looking at making the outer world comply to what I want by imposing on it. There is a more skillful way to have the outer world actually reflect something that you like to live in. And this is the Buddhist approach. Anybody have an idea what that is? It's working with karma. It's working with karma. Everything that happens because of causes and conditions. The conditions, and a lot of work is spent trying to control conditions, and that is successful to a degree. In order for something to ripen, let's compare karma to a seed. There's so many ways, there's many things we can compare it to, but in this particular one, let's compare it to a seed. Let's say in this life or in another, but in your past, the seed you planted in your energetic mind was that you might have taken things that really didn't belong to you. You planted the seed. In order for the seed to ripen, and what would be the ripening of the seed of taking things that don't belong to you? Karmically. What would happen when that seed ripens?
Somebody takes something from you.
People take things from you. Right? People take things from you.
Oh.
So maybe in order to control the but the conditions have to be right. So maybe in order to control the conditions, you make sure you live in a really good neighborhood. Not that I'm suggesting you don't. You make sure you live in a really good neighborhood. You make sure there's always locks on your door. You put in an alarm system. You hide away your stuff in safes. You really don't trust anybody. Okay, that's controlling the conditions. And to a certain degree that will work. But the better way is by pulling out, number one, the seeds you don't want. And there are ways to do that, which we're not going to discuss. And number two, planting the seeds that you do, which is what we're going to discuss. Changing what's in the field. So when you want a particular outcome, what are the causes and conditions? What karma can we plant to create the outcome that we want? Because if we think of the seed as an energetic thing that we put in our mind, and it attracts the response of the universe, which is energy, to it, the universe responds to that energy with a similar or a like event that happens. If we want certain happy outcomes, then we plant particular seeds and we can relax, the universe will work. In fact, that's how the universe works. That's how it came into being. That's how come it's the way we're alive. That's actually how we're alive. And everything in the universe came into being dependent on causes and conditions. Now, this is very typical Buddhist teaching. Everything is interdependent. We can take a proactive approach to this interdependence. So let's say, and I'll use this as an example because I talked with someone a couple years ago, and they were having a little bit of a financial struggle, and the economy hasn't been so great, and her husband had lost his job, and they were a little bit worried, and she was, like thinking about finding a job, and you do have to put in applications and look around it, etc. Finding a job so that there would be income. And I said, what do you need to do to create the karma to have enough? I could say abundance, but let's just say to have enough. I'm not talking about getting wealth. What do you need to do to create the karma to have enough? What creates the karma to have enough? Positive what?
Positive thinking, positive approach.
Okay. Positive thinking, but even more.
Positive reactions.
Okay, positive reactions, yes.
I would say letting go of the thinking that you need more.
Okay, letting go of the thinking that you need more. In other words, pursuing luxuries.
Or thinking that, I guess maybe it's understanding what is enough.
What is enough? Right. Having a good look at needs and wants, and maybe taking things that are actually in the category of want, that belong, and thinking that they're in the category of need, when they're really in the category of want. Like that? There's something even more proactive.
Change our definition of abundance, or our scale of kind of how much
Right.
do we need.
So bring our expectations.
Bring our expectations.
Right. Let's say, though, you do have rent or you do have a mortgage, and you really do need to pay it, because if you don't, in this conventional realm, the bank or the landlord is going to have something to say about it. There's still, what can we do? These are all good, and that's a step. Bringing our expectations down to something realistic and really reevaluating what is a need and what is a want. Okay, what else? Yes.
Being grateful for what you do have, creating an energetic atmosphere of appreciation.
Yes, an energetic atmosphere of appreciation and gratitude is extremely important. It's proactive. We don't do it enough, and Wang Mo gave a marvelous teaching on it in November, which was Thanksgiving month, so it was the appropriate topic. It's up on the Joyful Path YouTube page, and I strongly recommend going back and listening to it. It's very inspiring. So yes, gratitude is a very important karmic seed that we can plant. there are other karmic seeds that will help us have enough. Yes, Paul. Prayers? Yes. What kind of prayers? Asking for? Okay. You know, the reason I say this is some people might say, oh, please, God, give me a job with $100,000 salary minimum. I really want a new Bolt. Okay, those are the cars that are all electric and have a good, you know. So, I mean, prayers, yes, but and we could talk about different kinds of prayers. I'm just pointing out that there's different kind of prayers, you know. God, I will go to church every week this year, if you will. Okay. I'm not just saying prayers. I'm saying we need to look at the kind of prayers. There's something else that's actually very, very basic, as important as gratitude, that people don't think about for creating enough.
You're talking about generosity?
Generosity. One of the biggest ways to karmically create the conditions so that you do not have to worry about having enough is having a generous heart. Having a generous heart. That can be hard because we may feel we don't have enough to be generous. We're too poor to be generous. It's not true. So generosity is not just in what we do, and it's important that we do, but it's in the energetic, it's in being generous. Even people who have nothing can be generous in many ways. Does that make sense? So when you're really looking for, and this is what's exciting, creating the changes that you want in your life. Maybe you want to just sit down and have a really good, quiet session of contemplation. How do I plant the karmic seeds to bring in the kind of life that I want? If I want more time to meditate, how do I plant the karmic seeds? If I want a closer relationship with higher being, whether you look at that as Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, God, Spirit, however, how do I plant the seed? If I want more pleasant interactions with people, you know, there's these books, you know, how do I accomplish my work when I work with the turkeys? Or I can't remember exact title, but that's the idea. The idea that I'm looking at my coworkers as turkeys says something about me, not them. All right? It says something about me, not them. They're not the turkeys, I am. And I'm creating the energetic karma to have people respond to me in a particular way. Okay, so when we really want to be proactive about change, how do I transform? How do I create the karma to have life be the way I want? And it nearly always entails things like generosity, gratitude, loving kindness. These are the things that the Buddha taught. That we change our life by changing our states of mind. So when it comes to generosity, and this is something that I'd love to share with you, those of us who are in Peru, Rinpoche gave us an exercise in generosity. Who wants to share what that was and what it was like? Almost every day she gave us something different to do. As you're going around and about in Cusco today, or wherever we are going, you know, she would give us an exercise to do as we interacted with people. What was the exercise about generosity?
Well, it's funny because I was just thinking, as we've been talking about generosity, that we were just doing a set of interfaith prayers for world peace before this, and one of the prayers at the end by Shantideva is a line in that is, "May they have everything that they need, and may these be placed close beside them." And so my memory of Rinpoche's homework for us was that as you see people, as you come across them, regardless of what action you take, if you stop and acknowledge them verbally or just not, if you just walk past them, that in your mind you think, may all of their needs be fulfilled. They have everything that they need.
And you call it mental generosity. We can always have an attitude toward others of mental generosity. People came back the next day and they reported what it was like, what their experiences had been like as they walked through the city, and had an attitude of mental generosity. Does anybody remember what some of those things were?
The attitude changed towards different people they met,
Mm-hmm.
or got very close to them.
Mm-hmm. And the people would respond to them almost as though somehow they knew that these well wishes were coming at them. Now, I don't think that there's a bunch of people walking around who were mind readers, but they responded to the energetic of the mental generosity almost as though they knew. And in this way, there's all kinds of things we can do to actually create the change we want to see, create the life we want to live. It's, if we think about it, not that hard. We just haven't thought about it and put it into action. And the first, deepest, most powerful place to put it into action is our own mind. We make these changes in our own mind. And then life around responds. So some of the things that I've heard Rinpoche say is, don't waste, don't be wasteful. And that's like, like don't throw away good food, don't let it spoil when you could do something to preserve it. She really has given some strong instructions on don't being wasteful. She says, because if you are wasteful, you create the karma in the future to not have enough.
Oh, never thought of that.
So if things are going poorly in the world, I mean, granted, there's some preparations, we can things and have it put away for winter and whatever, and we're getting ready to go into 2 or 3 days of really, really intense wind chills, so they're telling people to get ready to hunker down, which means have everything you need in your house so that you don't need to go out and do anything and just stay inside and be warm. But so there is that preparation, but there's a lot of people who are really afraid in this country, and they're preparing for, I don't know, Armageddon or something. But what about the preparation of not being wasteful? Not having been wasteful all these years, of being a little bit maybe overly picky than we needed to be about what we use and how we use it and what we throw away. So that's part of it. And then again, generosity. In a situation where things are difficult, if everybody were generous, would everybody have enough?
So,
Yeah.
spreading the wealth.
Yeah. With a heart of generosity.
Right.
And versus people who I'll defend my stuff with a gun. It's my right. It's guaranteed. Okay. I don't want that karma. That is not creating the karma for the kind of life I want to live or the experience of others that I want. So I will tell you, I love the neighborhood I lived in the Milwaukee area. It bordered on an area. Milwaukee's considered, I don't know if it still is, but it has been considered one of the most, what's the word? People live in, pardon? Segregated cities. And we're talking about what might be considered inner city, or where you'd be concerned about gangs or whatever. I'm talking about bordering on areas that aren't. I mean, like across the street. There'll be a street, and this side is considered unsafe, and this side is okay. It's just amazing. And if you were on one of the bordering areas, you might be concerned. So I lived for probably 11 years. It could have been 13, maybe 11. It was over 10. In an area that was nice. It was a great school. I moved there so that my kids would go to a particular high school, which was the best high school in the Milwaukee area at the time. But there was a street 2 blocks away from us, and on the other side of the street was considered an area that was less than safe. Given the fact that my kids tended to lose keys, except at night when we were all home, I didn't lock the doors for the whole time I lived there. I didn't lock the doors I didn't advertise the fact that I didn't lock the doors. But I figured it was easier if the kids could just come and open the door and walk in than to be losing keys and the kids would say, oh, this is so-and-so's key. This must be the key to their house, right? I figured that was more advertising. So there were people who go through our neighborhood, and like I said, other than when we were all home at night already, we didn't lock the doors. Never had a break-in. Never had any problem. Now, it could have been luck, or it could have been the karmic result that I've never broken into anybody's house and taken their crap, you know? I don't know. So, I'm not saying to just go into the worst areas and be totally careless, but on the other hand, there is this thing called karma, and it's how the universe works. It's not an enemy, it doesn't punish you, it doesn't reward you, it simply is how things work. There are responses to causes and conditions. Causes and conditions create effects. It's very non-judgmental in how it works. I'm glad I didn't know that. Does that make sense? So when we think about a proactive approach to change, we can joyfully think, how do I create the life that I want? Rinpoche's told us if we want to be able to spend more time on retreat, how do we do that? We go on shorter retreats and we dedicate the merit of the retreat to being able to go back on retreat. And when you do that, the causes and conditions come together so that, in fact, the opportunity becomes available. What is the opportunity? Is the opportunity the finances you need? Is the opportunity that the time opens up? It doesn't really matter what it is. That if you create the karma to do it again, then it happens to do it again. And karma tends to replicate itself. So if you want to create the karma to be happy and have a reason to rejoice so that wonderful things happen and it gives you a reason to rejoice, how do you create the karma to rejoice? This is way easy. By rejoicing. Okay, it's like the reason that you create the karma. When you are grateful, you create the karma to have more to be grateful for. When you express gratitude or feel gratitude, you create the karma to be grateful, right? So that means more grateful type things happen. If you rejoice, you create the karma to rejoice. So it is so easy. It's one of the easiest ways, actually, because ignore what you read on the fake news channel, or here on, don't even look at the fake news channel, right? You can always find a reason to rejoice. Do you remember when those miners were stuck underground in Chile?
Chile, yeah.
Right. And they were found, they were kept alive, they were brought to the surface and they were freed. The entire world had the perfect opportunity to indulge in rejoicing. How many people looked at it with skepticism? Oh, well, somebody else says something bad's going to happen anyway. Oh, well, it was, overblown. I mean, here's an opportunity to rejoice. Did we take advantage of it? Just like rejoice with abandon. Yes, you had your hand up.
I remember she had a copy of National Geographic. I think it might have been the October issue that had the face of the Islamic woman. It was their photographic celebration issue.
The young woman who...
And in that issue, there's photographs of children slaves in gold mining with other people carrying guns. And I saw that, and the first thing I thought is, I'm grateful that I don't buy gold. And I don't karmically contribute to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I may not be able to solve that problem on the other side of the world, but I can contribute by not creating the demand on this side of the world.
Right. So that's good. And that is a much healthier way to create the causes and conditions to resolve problems than getting upset about something you can't change. There's lots of things in the world I alone cannot change. And if I spend my time in distress over them, I create the karma to continue to be distressed, even if they're unfair. So there's certain things I can do. I can sign a petition. I can call my congressperson or my senator. These are things I can do. I can write a letter. It's amazing, actually, how effective it is. People don't think it is, but it is. I spent some time as a graduate student lobbying, and it actually is very effective. Those are things I can do, but getting myself personally distressed about some of these things not only isn't going to change them, it's going to create the karma for me to experience more distressing things in the future. So I'm not saying ignore them. But being distressed about those things and just being distressed is part of the going with the flow and being at the mercy of change, rather than creating the causes and conditions for things to change the way we want. And does that make sense? The idea of this is to get the mindset of looking at and creating the causes and conditions for things to change in the way we want. And one of the things that does not create that mindset is skepticism. And people tend to be skeptical, I think, because they're protecting themselves. They think if they're skeptical, they're protecting themselves from disappointment. And what they're actually doing is creating the karma to be disappointed in the future. Does that make sense? So, what I hope that we take from this discussion is that there really are very easy and positive changes that we can make to make 2014 and any future what we want to experience. If we want the world to be filled with loving kindness, we need to become loving kindness. If we want the world to be filled with abundance, we need to be generosity. We need to have the heart of generosity. If we want the world to be filled with fairness, if we want the world to be filled with mercy, if we want to fill in the blank, the world, our life, our environment, the world we live in, then we need to create the heart or the mind that feels these things. If we want everyone to have a reason to rejoice, then we need to rejoice. Find a reason. It's as simple. Any thoughts you all want to share or responses to change and how to deal with change? Well, thank you all for coming. It's nice to have you here. It's nice to start this new year. May everybody have everything they need. Let's start off with maybe today our thoughts are mental generosity. All right. Thank you. You join me in dedication? May my capacity for compassion be infinite. I dedicate these efforts to complete and total enlightenment, so that I may be a benefit to all sentient beings. May it be so.